Morning, everyone, and welcome to the PatternFly demo for September 4th, 2018. We have quite a few items to go through, so let's go ahead and get started with our PatternFly 4 updates. Jen will be kicking us off with accessibility.
Okay, so the past sprint, one of the things that I did was to do an accessibility review of the pagination design. So the first activity that we did, or one of the activities we did, was to review this design as part of the accessibility review meeting that we have once a week. And the comments that came out of that, mainly, the main thing that we were concerned about was the combination of this page size selection with displaying the items that are visible on your current page. So we commented on that issue. And then I had also created a code pen based on the PatternFly 3 version of this component and tested it in JAWS just to see how it read out. So there were some things that I noticed there and provided feedback in the comments for this issue. And then also just some recommendations for how we can handle the HTML implementation and the ARIA attributes for this component. So any comments or questions about this item? Okay.
Cool.
So the other items Michael Spaxman worked on, I'm going to cover for him. He updated the PR template to include a status indicator. So when you open PRs, you'll see as part of these tests that are run, there's one for accessibility. So when you do open PRs, just check that that there are no issues. And if you have any issues, try to use the information that's provided to you to fix them. And then the other updates from Michael Spaxman were to include some notes on running that audit tool here in the README for the repo. And that's it. Any comments or questions? All right, thanks.
Thanks, Jen. And next up, we have Dana.
All right, so just to go off of what Jen was talking about a bit, we did some accessibility checks. There. So with that reporter, we had turned off the check for color contrast, and that was because we had problems. So this website, WebAIM or AIM, looking at accessibility, we can see an example of a failure that was happening in PatternFly 4, where the contrast ratio for this blue to a gray was not accessible. It was it was failing on the AA checks for normal tests. And you can kind of see that blue behind the light gray. So we were trying to figure out what to do with that, and spending a lot of time talking with the designers about that particular issue. So now we've come to some conclusions about how to start addressing these so that we can also have the right color contrast accessibility in PatternFly 4. And we were able to turn that test back on. So that's just letting everyone know that now we're testing for accessibility along with color contrast. And if you look at that link that Jen was just showing with the accessibility reporter, when you click on details, it takes you to the build log. And we're going to continue to enhance that to provide that feedback right back into GitHub. But for now, looking through the errors, you can get a sense of what the color contrast failures are as well. And this also includes the total number. And the way we're auditing this is we've kind of set a cap at the number of violations that we're allowing. And if it goes over that, it will fail to build. So we're continuing to bring that ceiling down. And that's it for that.
Thanks, Dana. Any questions for Dana? All right, well, we'll move over to interaction design, and Matt Crana will be sharing a few of his items.
Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen out. Okay, there's 3 things I'd like to show this morning. The first one First one, so I've been working with a team of UXD designers on concepts around filtering, and we currently have in the works a number of different filter components. So I think the overall approach that we plan to take for PatternFly 4 is to offer multiple options for filtering, which will maybe used by products given their particular use cases, and then look at how those filters get presented in the toolbar. So the first one is an attribute value filter, which is basically the same thing as what we're calling a text box filter in PatternFly 3. If you've been using PatternFly, you should be familiar with this filter with an attribute selector and then a value list that can be either something that the user types into, like a name, or something that they pick from a list. Date range filters for filtering by name. A faceted filter, also known as a checkbox filter, which allows for filtering by multiple attributes or facets in a structured data set. Toggle filtering using a button group for selecting, quickly selecting filters. And then finally, this type ahead or universal filter, which has been something that is being worked on currently in a couple of products for allowing the user to type into a field and seeing a choice of matching values as they type forward and and building an expression in place that way. So some of our next steps will be to kind of break this down into some smaller issues, prioritize these for more detailed design and development into PatternFly 4, along with looking at, and then the other thing is looking at the toolbar and how we might fit filtering into the toolbar, where we can have more expanded options than just having the simple filter, which we have now. We have a space for a simple filter in the toolbar, but exploring ways to expand the toolbar to allow for more complete, more extensive options. Okay, so I'll stop there with this. Any questions? Okay, so let me move on then to the next thing that I worked on in the sprint was just putting together some wireframes for an alert demo. We do already have an alert component in PatternFly 4. So the purpose of this is to show how that alert component can be used in context, and there's really two types of alerts that we need to consider. Those of you familiar with PatternFly 3 have seen these before. The inline notification and the toast notifications. We're not really changing these much from a behavioral point of view, but the inline notification would be an alert that would stick on the screen and be positioned at the top of the content area. And then the toast notification is the transient alert that pops out from the right-hand side of the screen and appears in the upper right hand of the screen. Right now, nominally, we have that appearing for 8 seconds. We did do a little bit of investigation thinking about how when you do get multiple toast notifications, how those should stack, and making a provision for what happens if you have more than three, and which is a fairly common use case, as I understand it, where you might have a bunch of things firing these notifications and making sure that we have an elegant way to handle that particular case. Any questions on this? So again, the links to both of these things are in the agenda. Feel free to take more time and comment on the Google Docs. And then the third thing that I wanted to show today was just we have started working on some of the design documentation content for PatternFly 4, the design documentation that will appear on the PatternFly 4 website. So I worked on creating a design doc for the drop-down component. This is currently an open PR, which I again invite comments on. But the essential idea here was to really provide some guidance on usage of the component. So you see we have here when to use, when not to use the drop-down, best practices for using drop-downs, table that reflects behaviors. Obviously the drop-down behaviors are pretty straightforward. And then any content guidelines. So here we talk about writing, naming menu items that should go into a drop-down. They should be action-based, etc. So that's about it. Any questions on this? Okay, that's all I've got for IXD. So Amy, I'll turn that back to you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so we're going to jump over to visuals now, and Michael will be getting us started with tabs.
Yep. All right. So I got the new design for tabs for PatternFly 4. Here's what they look like in context of just a pretty regular layout screen. And here you can see they exist at the bottom of our horizontally divided layout underneath the header. Here's a zoomed in version of it for the sake of the presentation. And to comment on the visual design a little bit, we wanted to differentiate it from our horizontal navigation enough, which isn't pictured here, but you might remember it's got a kind of the blue bar underneath the selected item. And so what we did is we just kind of flipped that. And so there's a blue bar on top, and each tab is encapsulated in its own box or rectangle. You can also see the hover state there, where the bar appears, but it's still gray, and the color of the text also hasn't. So here's an example of it in an actual product that is PatternFly 4 is being implemented in. It doesn't have the surrounding UI, but this is just a drawn example I took from an actual implementation. So you can see how they work here, also on a dark background. They work fine, and also in cards, which I'll touch on in a second, how we want to handle that. I tried it in a bunch of different places too. This is just showing them at the top of cards in a light background, just to show that they work. Tabs in a table, if we want to do that. We haven't really made this a sure thing yet, but it's just showing that it can work there if we choose to do that. Something for a list view, for whatever reason we need that. Tabs and panels. Again, this panel isn't really reflective of any actual true designs as of yet, but I just kind of threw it together to show that tabs would work in this context as well. And you can see the user settings and admin settings tabs up there. So trying to figure out how scrolling works with tabs. So, what happens when tabs overflow or extend beyond their allocated space. And as you can see, what happens on the right there is an arrow appears, and it's styled very similarly to the tabs themselves. It takes up the same height as the tabs, and on desktop, you'd click on that, and it would scroll. So a couple things happened here. One is you've scrolled to the end of the list, and there's still some work to be done around how much scrolls, I guess, when you click. So do you scroll a fixed amount, 2 or 3 tabs, or do you go till the last item that you were looking at is now beginning of the list, or as far as anywhere in between? But as of now, we're just going to say that it scrolls. And then a little bit of an experimental idea that I still need to discuss with development. I noticed when I was making this that the tab item that I was currently on extended, it was scrolled off view. So I thought, since we already are styling this arrow, which has now appeared because I'm scrolled beyond the first item, since that's styled similarly to the tabs, it could maybe inherit the same selected state as the tabs themselves to kind of just give the user a reminder that where they are is not in view. So that's still TBD, but it's an idea. So there's 2 spacing systems with tabs, and I think this is probably the more important or the most important thing to take note of. There's consistent fixed spacing, which is going to happen on page tabs, table tabs, basically anywhere tabs live that there's an abundant amount of room. And then we also have full width or flex spacing in places like cards or panels where there's a little bit less horizontal width or horizontal room for the tabs to live in. And what this does is it just flexes to fit the width of the container or of whatever they're encapsulated by. So like I said, cards or panels are where you're going to see this a lot. So consistent fixed spacing is just 8 pixels on both sides of the tab text to create that circle or the rectangle. And as you can see on the full width flex spacing, that spacing on the left and right of the text actually flexes to expand with an 8 pixel minimum, but it can extend beyond 8 pixels to fit the width. So why do we need both? Here's an example of why we need fixed spacing. There's 3 tabs here stretching across the whole page, which kind of gets away from the actual look and feel of what we're dealing with, or what we want.
Had only 1 participant for the last 30 minutes.
Oh, that was weird. Did you guys hear that?
Yeah, that's really weird.
Okay, I'll keep going.
You're not alone. There's more than one.
Yeah, okay. I hope so. Anyways, you can imagine if there were 2 tabs here just stretching across the whole width, because it would look ridiculous and it's not what we want. So that's why we need fixed spacing tabs. Here's why we need flex spacing tabs. You can see there's 3 tabs here in this card, and they don't extend the full width, and you get this little sliver of room right there, which might not be a big deal to some people, but from a visual perspective and just an overall design perspective, it's kind of messy and just kind of annoying to have a little chip of space like that right there. So both is what we need. Here's an example of both happening at the same time. Why we need fix, and then we've got flex in the card. And that's it. Oh, yeah, that's it. There's still some work to be done around the scrolling behavior and looking at mobile scrolling. So probably having a horizontal swipe to scroll as well, action in mobile. And then for the fixed versus flex spacing, we just need to come up with a detailed list of which items have fixed, or which components have fixed spacing and which components have flex spacing. And that should cover how we handle that. And then I want to show some more in context product screens, how they work there. That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Next is Kyle.
Okay, I'm going to show some pagination updates. Okay, so just really quickly, I'm going to show the sketch file. So what we have is just some pagination updates, which should reflect what Jen spoke about earlier from an accessibility point of view. The other updates were from interaction to include some of the older PatternFly functionality that we were going to limit the scope of originally. So what we have is the jump to first page or jump to last page functionality, which we added. And then the updates that for accessibility was moving the arrow to the right and then adding some spacing between the dash. So just some small changes, and those are reflected in the top navigation, in the top level pagination, and then it's also reflected in the bottom. So you could see it in both places. It's going to look very similar. And that's it for pagination. And then for empty state, we're still working on this pattern. Didn't get a chance to get this really complete. But the big changes here are from what exists in PatternFly 3 is we are not showing an icon within the context of the list itself. Oftentimes that was confused as content. So by removing that, it simplifies the visuals and also simplifies implementation. And it also makes it easier for people trying to choose which icon they're selecting. And then also switching to use a text link here to take action. So what I'd like to do is come up with more explicit text and have more documentation around what you should have in this place. So some examples that people can work from. The next thing is what does it look like within the context of an entire screen? So we talked about possibly having an icon in the top here and some sort of treatment for that. And something more subtle that doesn't look as clickable as this one. And then possibly switching this icon out to show which content you're showing here. So if it was like a list of VMs, you would have the VM icon here. So we're still working through the treatments here and which icons there should be here, and then the documentation that we'll need to describe that to people. But so if you entered a list of VMs, there's no VMs to show, and your text would reflect that, and then using the secondary button as the action in the whole page. So there's two different treatments depending on where it's located. I think there's more treatments for like cards and things like that we still need to explore, but we'll refine this as we go and come up with something that's more comprehensive. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions about this? Great.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Kyle. So we're going to jump over to CSS next, and Matt Nolting will be kicking us off with table list hybrid.
You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. This demo will include basically mostly debugging and some accessibility updates. I demoed this last demo, so it's pretty much the same, hasn't changed. The structure's changed a little bit. The HTML worked out some bugs, and then implemented just some more documentation in terms of accessibility that we discovered during some reviews. So I won't go through all of it. Some of the notable changes are like adding a button wrapper to sortable table headers, and reintroducing role tree grid to expandable tables. It just announces the roles, it announces the expandable table rows better by using tree grid, and there's some enhanced kind of control for keyboard navigation there. So I'll be submitting this PR soon after this demo, so you'll be able to see all of this there. So further testing or whatever can be done. And that's what I have.
Thanks. Any questions for Matt?
Yeah.
All right, and Sarah's up next.
Okay. Screen. So I have the progress bar, and there were a bunch of variations on that. So I'll just run through. Basically, got a lighter color bar that fills up the space, and then the progress is shown by this darker color here. Those colors are tied together so that they always, you only have to change one color for the progress bar and the whole thing changes. And then there's descriptive text. And there's a measure over here showing the percentage. And then you'll see there's a status icon on some cases. So the variations are, this is just the medium-sized one. There's a small size that makes the bar thinner. There's a large size that makes the bar thicker. And then with the large size, you can have two options where the progress can move down to be outside the bar to the right or inside the bar here. And then there are two states that are defined. So there's a success state, which turns it to the success color and adds a check icon. And then there's a failure state, which uses the danger color and adds a little X icon to show that there's a failure. And then there are just a couple examples showing combinations of these. So here's success shown with it inside, where we had to change the font color to make sure that there was enough contrast. Here's showing a failure with the outside measure to show that the icon comes down here beside the measure in that case. There's also an option so you don't actually put the percentage there in case you don't have that information and still need to use a progress bar. And then just covering all bases, here's one that doesn't have the measure but does have the icon. Then there's this final example. It's really there to show a difference in accessibility. So in most cases, the descriptive text here above the progress bar would be described in the ARIA tags as the described by. But in the case where this descriptive text might be updating the user as far as, we're loading this file, now we're loading this file, now we're loading this file, and that becomes meaningful, then it would want to use the ARIA value text and put that that text in that tag, so it would be read by the screen readers. I think that's about it. There are a bunch of ARIA tags that belong to just show the values, and then the modifiers are all listed below. It is responsive as far as it's not really going to show. If I had long enough text, it wraps and the measure stays down where it belongs next to the progress bar. I think that's it. Are there any questions?
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Sarah. And next we have Michael Coker.
Hi, let me share my screen. The first issue I worked on was this pretty small thing that we were including all of our CSS variables inside of our SAS utilities files. They were included with the SAS variables, and that was being injected into each component or layout that we have. And so we were including those instead of just once for each component. So the change you might see from this is that the CSS variables are now in an underscore variables file at the root of PatternFly, and the SAS variables are in the SAS utilities directory under SCSS variables. And then this is a work in progress. It's to build a PatternFly 3 themed version of PatternFly 4 so that customers can go ahead and upgrade to PatternFly 4 with PatternFly 4 markup and can potentially use a PatternFly 3 theme that makes their site look like PatternFly 3 for whatever need they have. And then when it comes time for them to be able to upgrade the design to PatternFly 4, they can just drop the theme that's being in place and they'll have a PatternFly 4 enabled site. That's it.
Awesome, thanks. And next up, we have Matt Carlton.
Hey guys. Okay. So basically what I did was some accessibility stuff on forms. So part of that was just going through all the different form components that we currently have with the screen reader and kind of testing them to see how it was handling it and making required kind of changes to make it a better experience. Also going through the accessibility audit that Michael Spaxman put together and just trying to tackle some of the issues that it raised through that. A lot of that was just little things like updating IDs and small tweaks. And then the other thing that I did was just a small change to the drop down, which was update the styles for the hover. This is part of another thing that's going to happen once we get icons a little bit more solidified. But this for now is just updating the color for the hover on the drop down. So this drop down will still get updated once we get some icon stuff figured out, but it was just part of that. And that is it.
Thanks, Matt. And next we have Christy.
Hi guys. So one of the main things that I worked on this week was the toolbar demo. So this is the toolbar PDF. These were made in Sketch by the designers. And I first created this simple toolbar, which is number 4, and we had all the components for that. So that's there. It's a drop down, filter and search with Matt Carlton's search icon he was working, or the icon within the input text that he was working on. Drop down, search icon, and this action bar. And then number 8 in this is this one. So this is more of a complex toolbar. It has 2 lines. And again, pretty much the same as a simple on the top. And then second line has a drop down, label, and then these labels here. So it's built out those 2. And then something else I worked on was the button component class, and you can't see any changes here with the buttons, but to the code basically removed a lot of double assignments. So for example, with the button component class, some like background color, for example, was on the component and it was also on the modifiers. So just kind of working out where those assignments should be placed so we can get rid of some of the lines of code there. So that was it from me.
Awesome. Any questions for Christy? Okay, and Andy and Andres.
Anyway, I can wait for.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so last week Andres pushed up the PR for the login screen, and this is the PDF of what it should look like, and we tweaked it a bit with some design feedback. The padding in particular was a bit kind of large when we put it into actual code. And on the right is the login page here, fully responsive for tablet layouts and mobile layouts too. Desktop with a very clever linear gradient to achieve this dark area on the left. And you notice that we don't have the kind of Google sign-in area or the footer list in terms of use, etc. So this next task, creating a list component that could be turned into either of those layouts using a modifier, either this grid or a horizontal list. And that's that for that. And I think Andres can describe the next 2 bullets.
Yeah, just 2 more things. While doing this, we remove the margins on the title components. So if you want to create a margin on a title, you will have to use a spacer utility class. And also we fix a bug on the background of the background image that didn't have a background color, so now it does. So if the image doesn't load, then it will look black anyway.
Any questions for Andy and Andres? Thanks, guys. And next we are jumping over to React, and I'm up, so I will share my screen. And can everyone see?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I worked on the text area component for PatternFly for React. This is pretty similar in structure to the text input component that I demoed for last demo. So for the examples, we just have a simple text area, and then we also have an invalid text area, which applies the invalid class. And then down below, as usual, we have our props. So we have like class name, if it's required, if it's valid, the value, and we have an onChange function, which is just a callback that handles when the value changes. And then we have our custom ARIA label prop. And that's been merged in already. So if anyone wants to check that out in more detail, feel free to do so. And next up, we have Yakima.
Hold on, let me try to move to a room.
Hi, can you see my screen? All right, so this is a quick one. Basically, I just restructured the repository on PatternFly React a little bit. So now if you go into the packages directory, you can see that there's two new subdirectories, PatternFly 3 and PatternFly 4. And within those, you'll find specific packages related to those items. And at the root of packages, there should be items that are kind of general purpose, that are not really just PatternFly 3 or PatternFly 4 specific. And that's it.
Any questions for Yakima? All right, and we have Titani.
Okay, let me just share my screen.
And moreover.
Oops, sorry.
No, I have another idea, Alex. Yeah,
Can you see my screen?
No.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I see a blue screen.
Okay. Do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So I worked on the select component for React. So there are three examples here, just a basic select input where you can select one of the inputs, and then we have a group select. So this is where we have you have different groups to categorize and organize the selection choices. And then just a disabled select input. So the expected props are, you can pass in a class name. The value, so that will be the selected value. Options, which is going to either be an array of options that go in the select component or an array of groups. And we're giving the consumer the ability to structure these objects however they choose. So we ask that they provide is options groups, so we know whether the array is an array of groups or array of options. They should provide a callback function to get the option group label. So given an option, which is a group, we need to extract the label from there. Get option from group, so we want to get a single option from the given group. Get an option label from the group. Get option value. And we want to know whether the option should be disabled, so get option disabled. Whether the selection is valid. Then we have is disabled, which would disable the whole selection. And then they can provide callbacks for on blur and on focus and on change. And then we have the custom ARIA label. So any questions? Okay, so this has been PR'd. It's not merged yet. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks to Tani. So yeah, I think that's about it. There aren't any PF3 updates for today. So thank you everyone for all of your work and for joining. I'll be sending out a recording shortly after this, and I hope to see you all for next demo. But feel free to reach out if anyone has any questions in the meantime. So thanks everyone, and happy Tuesday. Bye.